Okay, along those lines, questions?
Bobby, the correspondence between Novelin and Donald Grant, have we been able to recover any of those lost pages?
Not that I know of.
Does the Grant estate acknowledge that anything like that might even exist?
I haven't asked.
Good question.
You know, they might have it in some business archive. I haven't asked yet. I do have to say one thing to you. You were wrong on Lovecraft on a couple points, but it doesn't affect your conclusion. Lovecraft actually did have 2 encounters with the police, which are not covered in any of his letters to Howard. And he was a conservative, but he was never a Republican, and he was getting more progressive as the Great Depression went on. So it doesn't really affect what you said. It's just legally.
Told Bobby.
It wouldn't be Bobby if we didn't get a Will actually in there. Questions? Yes, another one.
One's for you, Jeff.
Sure.
Talk about Atkinson here. Do you think that maybe Burroughs also pulled something from here? Because Burroughs was another one.
So, you know, it's interesting. There was Burroughs certainly may have had a theosophical influence. It was Fritz Leiber wrote a story called, an article in an early issue of Amra called Swords of Theosophy, where he pitched the idea that, you know, was trying to make the case that Burroughs was borrowing some stuff from theosophy. One of the main ones that I think, you know, he may have been onto something was the idea of the green Martians coming from the theosophical version of the Lemurians, which is an interesting idea. It's not exactly, but but maybe, right? It's close. They were oviparous, right? They laid eggs, things like that, like the Martians, you know. So I think that most of so many of those early speculative fiction writers in that early Edwardian period, especially Burroughs, Merritt, you know, a lot of those folks were borrowing pretty heavily from, if not directly from theosophy, from other occult sources. Howard was as well, Lovecraft was, Smith, all those guys. I mean, theosophy became the core behind all of the occult and esoteric ideas that were percolating out there in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And early speculative fiction writers were mining it wholesale,
This
just
goes
pulling
even
it
into
right.
the 60s
you
and
know,
70s into the comic book world when you
Yes.
start talking about things like Khazar and the Warlords.
100%, 100%. The like lost, and there it's Antarctica. There's another rabbit hole I could go down. I showed Bobby this Agartha book that I just got. That's all like, it's like one of the first books. It borrows from somebody that stole stuff from Howard, and it's where you first start getting like UFO bases in Antarctica and stuff in like the early 50s. This stuff just constantly, it's recursive, right? You get we talked about Donnelly and stuff in Ignatius Donnelly and his Atlantis book in the first thing. Donnelly and Blavatsky was doing theosophy all in the 1880s. You get all this stuff going around. Then you get this early generation of fictional writers, like Merritt, Burroughs, and those guys in the early, and then Lovecraft and Howard and Smith and the Weird Tales guys pulling off of this stuff. But then you get so they're stealing from occult ideas, right? But then when you get into the 30s, 40s, 50s, you get occultists stealing stuff from the pulp writers of that previous generation and pulling stuff from Howard and Lovecraft, and they're mixing it into early occult stuff in the 40s and 50s and stuff, and it just these things keep feeding each other until you get to today where we've got Ancient Aliens and Graham Hancock and stuff like that, right? And people that probably don't even know the origins of where the ideas that they're promoting even come from, and this this feedback loop, right? Kind of cool stuff.
Good research.
But,
Do you think you would have dealt with like the out of Africa theory?
how would Howard have dealt with it?
Yeah, well, I don't remember when that's accepted as standard compared to
So Howard did, it seems like, at least in his fictional work, promotes the idea of multilineal evolution. I think he kind of hints at that even in one of his letters to or in a conversation with Novelin, I believe that he might have thought that as well. That idea was definitely more prevalent in this time, That's a good idea. And out of Africa, I mean, it wasn't solid until we got the DNA, like of the first Eve, which was, God, what, 80s probably, something like that.
Continental drift wasn't even agreed on.
Continental drift wasn't. It had been put out there, but it was a fringe idea. So, it wasn't, out of Africa was not really an accepted theory at the time. It was out there, Actually, out of Lemuria was a popular idea at the time, and that's where Lemuria originally came from. It wasn't a theosophical idea originally. It was put forward as an idea to explain. It was originally in the Indian Ocean, and it was put forward by geologists to explain lemurs in Madagascar and lemurs in Southeast Asia, and then Ernst Haeckel turned that into, I bet humans came from Lemuria too, a sunken continent in the Indian Ocean, right? And that's where they spread from. So we weren't that far away from that when Howard was writing. So he was still, even when Howard was making use of mainstream ideas, they would not be very mainstream today, right? Yes. Do you have a question? Oh, okay. Any other questions?
I got one, Willard.
Oh, that's good, man. You keep us busy. It's good stuff.
The comment you showed to Lovecraft was about the police would arrest someone, and then they would evaluate them, and it'd either be go to an insane asylum or they go to jail. Did he not recognize the fact that somebody could actually be innocent? Probably not.
If the police thought they were guilty, they were guilty.
I see.
I mean, if the police arrested him, they must be guilty, of course.
Yeah. But I have another question. Though. It's interesting you said there were no studies before the 1970s, because we went to the civil rights movement in the 60s and integration in the 50s, and obviously police corruption was exposed and prejudices were exposed then. But we didn't have any studies until the 70s.
No public opinion of the police studies until
Wow. That is amazing.
then. Yeah. So,
I can't believe that during the 60s we didn't have any investigations of the fuzz.
well, that we had, but no public opinion. Asking the
We had a lot of
questions.
local investigation going on in Haight-Ashbury at the time.
I think we got,
Yeah, I was
Right.
thinking about something that, Bobby, you were saying earlier in the last panel, in sort of painted an image of Robert E. Howard as a very pragmatic writer, and he would just adapt, he would change his stories in a way that would get them published. Have you, lined up the editorial feedback with the changes of the Hyborian age to see how much influence or how that changed the response to the
Not as much as I should have, and that's a great point. Yeah.
we have talked about it some,
Right, a little
especially
bit.
in the Phoenix on the Sword.
Right.
Originally, the Phoenix on the Sword did not have no prints.
Right.
It had a longer opening chapter about the Hyborian age, which then got strongly condensed. But yeah, we have got some of Farnsworth Wright's letters to Robert E. Howard, talking about how to fix his stories, and Howard would fix them because he wanted to sell. Howard was he was an artist, but he was not an artiste.
Right.
He was not an auteur. He was willing to do what it took to make a sale, but the end product was still very good.
He wasn't Lovecraft.
Yeah, Lovecraft did not want to change a comma.
Right.
So would he go back and, once he's made
Well-
those editorial changes for the stories, go back and fix the backstory and setup so it's consistent?
Here's an idea along those lines, and because you made me think of it just now talking about that. Remember in the earlier panel we talked about Men of the Shadows, right? Where really it's not much of a story. It was him doing like an early version of the Hyborian Age essay, and then trying to tack it into a story, very shoehorn it in essentially, and Wright called him out on it, right? A few years later, after he got Phoenix on the Sword back, and he had to condense that chapter, and it turns into the Noah Prince, intro. That's when he started working on the Hyborian Age essay. He got that sale and started working on. He'd written a couple like that, Frost Giant's Daughter, and God and the Bull, right? Those first three. And it sent them off. But then he started working on this Hyborian Age essay. He's like, okay, maybe I'm onto something here. Let me work on this. And developing another world-building essay, going through multiple drafts. But instead of shoehorning it into a new Conan story where the median scholar is like, let me read to you the story of like the right where he did, instead he took it and he condensed it into dialogue, and it appears in dialogue in the mouth of Yak Kosha in the next story he writes, Tower of the Elephant. Right, so he takes, and you get, I remember the three, and you get Yak Kosha telling snippets, like summarizing what Howard had just written in that Hyborian Age essay. But this time Howard was smart enough to put it into dialogue in this elephant-headed alien instead of just sticking it all in there, right? And he made it a part of the story, made it a part of the dialogue, right? So that's maybe one idea. Mm-hmm.
Howard took a lot of different influences from other people. Like his discussions with Lovecraft about the police made it into The God in the Bowl.
Right.
And they made it into Queen of the Black Coast.
Yeah.
And, he would work in these ideas as they came to him from wherever they went into whatever format they needed to be in.
It's amazing reading, reading Means to Freedom, and you're reading this. Oh, that's in whatchamacallit story, right? Like, you see so many things that come out of their exchange, and they'll show up as pieces of stories or dialogue in stories or themes in stories like that. It's pretty cool.
So did Howard's world building inform his storytelling more than his storytelling informed his world building? What was the relationship of weaving these two things together?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
what I'm picking up.
It was a flow. It was definitely a flow.
It was.
It's how he wrote the stories was influenced by his thought, and when he wrote the stories, that influenced how he was thinking about it.
Yeah.
Here's an example. The Hyborian Age essay, this is, and again, this goes into the thought that he put into his world building, right? People forget now, the Hyborian Age essay was never meant to be published. It was published a few years later in a fanzine. It was for Howard, right? It was his own personal backstory for this so that he could try and keep things organized. It went through 4 drafts. His own personal backstory, world building document went through drafts, but we could see the evolution in his drafts, right? So some of the time periods that you see in the Hyborian Age essay, the next 500 years looks like this, and the next 1,000 years looks like this. And the drafts are actually longer periods. It's 1,000 becomes 10,000, 500 becomes 5,000, right? So he was working on compressing the time. He was expanding. He was doing things like that. He was probably because he felt like, that's not going to fit what I need for the story because I need to make it work in here. And so he wasn't opposed to changing things, right, to make the story work, right? But it was a back and forth, give and take, right? It was a flow, as Bobby said. Yeah.
And with that, I think we're at the end. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, everyone.